Welcome to our latest podcast, Life as We Know It. And this is our series from Menopause Experts Group, where myself, as community and ops director for Meg, and Dee Murray, our founder and CEO, are in conversation with our champions and our members of our Menopause Pro initiative. And it's just about having conversations about life as we know it as women who've reached a certain stage. And I've got with me today fabulous Megan Hayward. Megan is in Australia. So, hi, Megan. It's great. I'm in France. You're in Oz. We can be connected like this. It's just incredible. And it really is a pleasure to have you join me. And we've
Thank you
just
for having
been
me.
chatting about what happens when we have gone through a significant period of change and the that impact of hormone change and the fact that we don't want this to be a surprise for other women, do we?
No, definitely not. Not like it was for us.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
both you and I, it was totally unexpected, wasn't it? The I guess that sense of anxiety of losing sense of self.
yeah,
So I think a good place for us to start this conversation would be for you to share what your experience was and how significant it was for you at the time, particularly in terms of sense of self, working, family, and then how you, I guess, for me, I'm so interested in where you are now because we've just had a great conversation about how much more positive things are now. So yeah, you tell me what your experience was.
yeah. Well, I guess for me, my change started when I was about 35 or 36. But leading up to that, I had, by the time I was in my 30s, I'd built a really solid career in construction. So my day job and basically my life is has always been in construction and building houses, and grew up in a family business of concrete and earth moving. So I actually laid my first slab when I was 8. So for me, construction has always been in my blood. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm went on to, despite my father wanting me not to work in construction, because he didn't immigrate to Australia for his daughter to work in construction. But I went on and, got qualified. My first trade is interior design. I've got a couple of master's degrees. I was leading in national roles that I'd worked really hard to get into in executive positions. And, back the pre sort of around Perry starting, I had been at the time nominated for really 2 prestigious awards in my sector. Um, Anyway, also around that time, finishing my master's degrees, I'd gone traveling with my husband for a year. It was amazing. I landed a beautiful job that I was like super passionate about, that was for me, had a lot of purpose and impactful projects, particularly around housing for older women who were becoming homeless. So that was really purposeful for me. And, I'd paid off my house, I paid off my HECS debt by the time I was 40. And from the outside, everything was perfect. Like I looked like the poster child of how to do life. But then perimenopause hit. And back then, so this is 12 years ago now, I had never heard the word menopause, let alone perimenopause. And so over sort of several years, but starting around 35, 36, I experienced 30 different symptoms, and they started showing up one by one. Like probably the first thing that I noticed was a change in my period. So I'd always had very extremely light periods, like barely a period, but they were painful. I had headaches and other symptoms that I now know is PMDD. But so that was one of the first things. I went from having barely a period to these super heavy periods that, like it was just distressing. Um, and then probably the next thing that I became aware of, but, wasn't putting two and two together, was the insomnia. So then I started not sleeping. And when you're trying to work in executive roles, managing people, managing huge projects, insomnia is not conducive to success in that environment. But yeah, some of the other things that I experienced. So I also had a non-stop period for basically 6 months. Like it was just felt like it was never ending, this period. Just wouldn't go away. It might stop. I had really chronic joint pain and muscle aches. And so investigate whether I needed hip replacement surgery, because I could barely use my left side. So my left hip in constant pain. If I rolled onto that side, I'd wake myself up in the night. I had heart problems, so I stopped drinking coffee and I cut out sugar because that's what I thought it was. I am someone that has lived with depression for most of my life, and mostly unmedicated. But when perimenopause started, it was different. And I still like, I think the thing that changed the most for me was the depression and the anxiety, and I got very rageful, but it was these incredibly invasive and overwhelming thoughts of suicide in a way that were explicit in what my mind was telling me to do. And it was overwhelming and debilitating. And I think the other thing too, which I'm having a bit of a giggle about, but at the time it wasn't funny because I was really suffering with brain fog. And so with that, I actually one day forgot my own sister's name. So I had my family around for lunch and my sister walked in and I was like, oh, oh God, like literally could not remember my own sister's name. And so I just said, oh, hello, beautiful. But deep down, I was like, Jesus, why, like literally, why can't I remember her name? I've known her whole life and I can't remember my own sister's name. But also around the same time, it was me presenting really big, like, I mean, multi-million dollar complex projects in boardrooms and being in the middle of explaining something and completely losing my numbers, the thing that I was talking about, and feeling like a complete idiot in those environments. And I think, and also just losing other people's names. Like I have in my work, I do a lot of networking, a lot of, events. And, literally walking in and seeing someone who I've known for 20 years and being like, hey, how are you going? And then needing to introduce them to someone else. And so I got really good at being like, if it was you, Rona, I'd be like, oh, Rona, this is Rona. And then, you'd go, oh, hi, I'm Rona. And then that person would be able to say their name to you rather than me saying their name. But yeah, and I think as I touched on already, but with the insomnia, it was the insomnia and night sweats, and that went on for at least 5 years. And just that one symptom. So I cut out alcohol because I thought it was the alcohol that was causing that. But that particular symptom, so working in big executive roles, working 14, 16-hour days, trying to manage people and not sleeping, feeling compelled to be at an office, by 7:30 in the morning and then not leaving until 6 or 7 at night and then continuing working when you got home. But that ultimately for me really led to, like, the fatigue was overwhelming. The depression, not sleeping increases your depression and anxiety and rage. Like you get very short-tempered. And ultimately that particular symptom really led to a lot of difficulties in my work environment because, you don't want to seem weak. I didn't want to seem weak in the environments that I was working in. And so I didn't feel like I could say to someone, I'm not sleeping. And instead, what was happening was I was being put onto or being performance managed. You know, Megan, you're very direct. Megan, you can't speak to people like that. Megan, you're going too fast, always addressing the outcome of what I was experiencing and no one ever asking me, you seem really tired. Is something going on? Like no one ever asked me that. And I think that for me was a really big disservice. And so it's something now that I talk about, particularly when I'm talking with organisations and going in and doing training, is saying, if you've got an employee who's been a stellar employee, because I was still am a stellar employee, do my job really well, meet all the KPIs, exceed the budgets, do everything on time, under budget, all that. But then, if you've got someone like that, that all of a sudden around 35, 36, maybe 38 or 40 gets very short, doesn't seem like themselves, all of a sudden you need to performance manage them. Instead of going, you've got a problem, as in you are the problem, actually go, is there something going on? Like, so I say now to people, I'm like, when women and even men return from paternity leave, one of the first things you always ask those people is, how are you sleeping? Right? Because 9 times out of 10, they're not sleeping because they've got a screaming baby. But we never ask the midlife woman, how are you sleeping? Because the reality is they're not sleeping either. They've been awake since 3 a.m. with KLF going around in their mind. Well, at least I am. Like, do you know that song? 3 a.m. the turn up. And so you never ask the midlife woman, how are you sleeping? Because they're not sleeping. And I think that for a lot of women would be the biggest change, to be able to say, how are you sleeping?
How are
And
you
if you're not
sleeping?
sleeping,
But actually, that asking, how are you?
correct.
What, because, and that, for me, that also feels like it's respect and it's dignity, isn't it? And it's human, it's being a human manager. However, we know that all of us in the workplace who are managing people, budgets, projects, you and I have both done that.
Yeah.
Um, that in itself is pressured. And
Mm,
so if organizations are solely results focused and there's so much pressure there, then the temptation is to go straight to performance management, isn't it? And we hear that, I'm sure you will, in the conversations you're having in the workplaces now. And I have heard it because I speak to so many women and men too, of course, but so many women as part of my day-to-day role who have had exactly that experience. So just going straight into performance managing without somebody saying, this is unusual. This is not
yeah.
like this person. What might be going on?
Yeah.
And also from the age perspective too. So that there's it's we don't, even although we are becoming more cognizant, I think, as a society generally, globally, of
Yeah.
menopause, not necessarily perimenopause, but this thing menopause, there's still not an understanding that it can actually hit in our 30s. And also, something you mentioned there that we talked about earlier, and that I'm having more and more conversations about, is the fear element. So the fear
Mm,
of becoming like that. So the
yeah.
brain fog, the being anxious, then just absolutely not being able to function sometimes at work. And also the barriers to actually declaring that in the workplace because of how
Yeah.
we will be viewed. Um,
Yeah.
and my experience goes back many years. We're talking 2012. I eventually left my corporate career in 2013 because I'd gone through perimenopause and menopause early. And like so many women, you've described life circumstances, it all contributes to how we experience that hormone change, doesn't it? And then the hormone change will impact on the other life experiences. And for you and I, we're both so passionate about removing those barriers in the workplace so that women do feel safe, if that's the right word, to be open about what's happening
Correct.
and not feel like they will be dismissed, sidelined, viewed differently. And I think back to my time in that sort of role,
Yeah.
managing big teams to deliver projects, being in rooms with senior clients, and actually that's our experience. But even if you're in a completely different workplace environment, you're still going to feel vulnerable if you're not able to do your job in the way that you normally would have. And I think, would I have wanted to sit in meetings with clients knowing
Mm.
that I was going through all this, that I would suddenly just not be able to think about what am I meant to be talking about? What am I presenting here? Who are you? Why are we here?
Yeah.
And I think once people in the workplace start to understand how significant it can be, they are generally, and I suppose we're talking largely about men here and maybe women who've not experienced that to the same extent. They really are gobsmacked, aren't they, about how
We
impactful it can
are.
be.
But I think, yes, there's a couple of things I want to touch on here, Rona, because I think it's really important. The first one is we as women, so the statistic in Australia is 70%, 70% of women in Australia in 2026 are arriving at perimenopause with zero understanding of what's about to happen. So if 70% of women don't understand what's going on, that means that pretty much 5% of men might have a vague understanding of what's going to happen, right? And so that's if you just take that as in your own personal space, your home space. If you translate that into the business, that's like a double zero, zero on zero. There's like zero understanding for the women of how we're supposed to ask for support. And there's zero understanding for men of how to support us because traditionally, and this is again something that I talk about in every single one of my education sessions, because I think it's so extremely important to understand exactly where we've come from in a women in the workforce and history perspective, because, and I show these, I show real advertisements from the 50s and 60s and even a little bit earlier, because the reality is it's not as though we've just arrived in 2026 and all of a sudden we've got perimenopause and menopause, right? It's always been there since the dawn of time. It's just that since the dawn of time, the way it was managed was that we were silenced, medicated and silenced either with tranquilizers or with lobotomies. So if you spoke up about your experience and you were labelled hysterical, unstable, or unfit, or even if you were just difficult, if you're a difficult woman, a difficult housewife that didn't keep the house clean, you really did risk being treated in a way that was barbaric, right? So that has continued. So what then that translates to is that's our grandmothers and mothers and great-grandmothers. They were like, we don't want to be that hysterical woman. We don't want a lobotomy. We saw what happened to Marge, And so, no, we're just going to be good women. We're going to keep our mouths shut, literally. And so that translated into the workplace. So in the workplace, so I look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics data to demonstrate this. So women sort of on the data that we have available became very prominent, like really we increased our participation in the workforce around the 80s. So we were always in the workforce, but we really sort of picked up in the 80s. And as we entered the workforce, Two things. So up until 1966 in Australia, women who were married were immediately banned from working. There was a law here called the marriage bar. So it was illegal for you to work after you were married.
It was the
And then
same
it
in
was
the UK.
yeah, and then even more bizarre. So when I was speaking to a group of women for the aviation and aerospace, and there were a lot of young women in the room. They'd never heard of this, right? And then I said, well, beyond that, it was only in 1971 that women were allowed to have their own bank accounts without the permission of their father or their husband. They were like, what? And so I'm like, so
Mhm.
you take that into account. When we started entering the workforce in greater numbers, silence became a survival strategy because the unspoken rule from our mothers and grandmothers and what we saw happen to them, and all of a sudden we're in the man's world where we shouldn't be. We're taking men's jobs, but we're working because we want to work and we want to be independent. So silence became a survival strategy, right? And the unspoken rule was extremely explicitly clear. Don't be troublesome. Don't show weakness, and don't, whatever you do, bring women's problems into a man's world, right? But that is where I think we have done ourselves the biggest disservice, because previous generations of women, when I look at this data, there's a clear dip where, pregnancy happens, motherhood, we dip out and we come back in, and then we drop off at menopause. Literally, this is what the graph does. Now, what happens and why this conversation is so important is the latest data shows, and it's in a green line. It's this data that it just shows this continuous line now. So women we enter in our 20s and we keep going all the way through. We're actually working past 65. And we are in the workforce through every major biological event. We return to work much sooner after we've given birth, which I haven't given birth personally, but knowing what my sisters and many girlfriends have gone through, I'm like, how do you go back to work after that event? Most of us are like, I don't know any single woman that goes, oh God, I've had a good period this month. Have you ever heard anyone say that? Right? So we're hiding our most basic biology, dealing with pain, dealing with heavy bleeding. We're also dealing with endometriosis. We're dealing with pregnancy, postpartum trauma, all of that stuff. And then we hit perimenopause. Yeah, we don't know what the workplace is, still in that silence phase because we worked so hard to get there. We've proven ourselves that, okay, I've had a baby, but I'm still able to work. Even though I'm the chief executive of everything outside of the door of this office, I'm actually also the chief executive here as well, and managing 50 people, like herding cats all day. And, so then you get to perimenopause and it's like, yeah, we need different support because support that's been in place has been minimal at best, if anything. And then we get to this really magical and major biological transition in our lives. We're not talking about it properly. We don't know how to support each other. We still don't want to be that crazy person. And so I think without, I don't want to scare people, but I think it's really important to have that context, because that context for me is a big red flag. I don't want any woman coming behind me to ever feel like she couldn't ask for a reasonable adjustment to be able to work from home for the 5 days that she's bleeding, because she's bleeding through her pads. I don't want any woman who is in postpartum to feel like she's going to lose her job because she's become a mother. And I don't want any woman that's worked her whole career, got to, her mid-30s, worked her way up the corporate ladder, and then because her estrogen is dropping and other things changing, and just the simple thing of weight shifting, your libido going, all of that stuff, you don't leave at the door. There's no magic switch. So I don't want any woman that's worked super hard and done everything right in her career to then be told, you're a problem. You're very difficult, Megan, because you're very direct in the way that you speak. You know, like I don't want any woman to ever be told that just because of her hormonal changes. I want organisations and I also want other women to ask better questions. So for women, for ourselves, when we start noticing changes, instead of going brushing it under the carpet because we're too busy, I've got another rung on the ladder to climb or whatever it is, like actually stop and ask yourself, what's changed? And start really monitoring yourself in a meaningful way. And if it means writing it down in a journal, do that, or a little note on your calendar, do that. But whatever it is, ask yourself, has something changed? And then if you notice another change, go, okay, I think it might be time to have a conversation with someone, whether that's your girlfriend in the first instance or your husband or your partner, someone that you trust, and go, yeah, I think this is starting to happen. Have a conversation because more than likely that's happening for them as well.
I
But
think
then in
that's a
the,
really good. I think I can just interject. Absolutely, Megan. And I think this comes from your own experience, doesn't it? And we
yeah,
speak to so many women, and the conversations that we've been having on these podcasts as well. There's definitely a theme because we do just get on with it generally as women for whatever
for
reason. We really
years,
do. Like you've
years,
said, you're chief executive of absolutely everything. And whether or
everything.
not other people actually ask that of us, for some reason, for most of us, it's still what we do. And we continue, we continue, we continue.
It is.
We don't we don't sense check. We're not like listening. And I think maybe that younger generation, the Gen Zs, maybe they are starting to become a bit more conscious of listening to themselves, of what feels right, and on maybe a little bit off. And then, as you say, doing a bit of course correct, whatever we might want to call it, because looking back, I think that's what happened to me. I didn't do any of that. I just kept on going, thinking actually things were, just a bit tired, 80-hour weeks, family stuff going on, etc., the usual kind of thing. And then it just,
Yeah,
for so many of us, it comes to a point where, had this conversation with somebody yesterday, we simply cannot continue. Our we can't continue to function. And what we want is for that not to happen. And that recognition, as we were talking about earlier, that this is part of the natural biological
natural.
cycle of life. And
Yeah,
you've just made that point so eloquently, that this is what happens. We don't There's no recognition of the impact of hormone health for men too, but for human beings right throughout all the stages of life. And you said something very early on when we were chatting before we pressed record that we talk about a lot at Meg and is really, really resonating with me, is that financial impact, that fiscal impact. Now, there's an impact on economies, but you and I are wanting to talk about women as individuals and that impact of lost time at work, particularly in the current economy where very many people don't get paid if they're not at work. We're
yeah,
seeing that more and more, aren't we? And then
yeah,
if you're off for an extended period of time and then you don't get paid after that. And
yeah,
then if we leave our careers early, that has an impact on pension. And
yeah.
we really, really do need to be raising that awareness of that impact too. That it
Not
impacts on
just,
all aspects, doesn't it?
it does 100%. So, because I like my figures, in Australia, it is 27% of women are retiring under the age of 55, as directly attributed to menopause. And then a further 17% of women take an extended break out of the workforce between the ages of 45 to 65, again, mostly due to menopause. And I know that was myself. Like I took a really big break, different bits of breaks. But I think all up, I probably took between nine, 9 to maybe 14 months out of work for redundancies, but also and trying to get back into the workforce, but also for my mental health and trying to recover mentally, to be mentally fit to go back into the workforce, but then also trying to manage my symptoms that were unmanageable for a period of time, and then trying to manage HRT. Because that, it's like everyone talks about HRT being this magic pill, which it does. It really does help you. But for me, it's taken 4 different versions to find the one that works really well for me. And that's been years. And when I very first started, it went along swimmingly for a few months, and then it's just almost stopped working. And it was, again, it's those moments where you're like, what's going on? But I was going to say also from a economic cost, because it builds up. So, and I've recently talked about this at an event, so it's fresh in my mind. But if we start with periods in Australia cost the economy $9.6 billion in lost productivity and earnings. Then if you go to the next thing, which we don't talk enough about, but endometriosis, and that starts for a lot of women in their teenage years when they first start their period. So they're living with this condition, still doing amazing things, but that costs the Australian economy, I think it's $14.2 billion in lost earnings and productivity. And then you get to perimenopause, and that costs the Australian economy $17 billion. Just those 3 figures, because I'm very passionate about housing for women, Rona. Just those 3 figures in those billions, that to me is the housing crisis solved. I'm like, imagine if we kept all those women working. Imagine if the organisation asked different questions. And we kept those women working. We kept them in the workforce. Like, how different if an organisation said, what are the barriers we're creating without meaning to for women? Like, what are we asking women to do, like to push through, keep silent about, instead of having the psychological safety to speak up and ask for help? Like, have we actually reviewed our policies to go? So we've said we've got a flexible working policy, but it never said anything about menopausal symptoms. Like, have we actually reviewed that, or periods, or endometrium, whatever it is? Fertility treatment is another thing for a lot of midlife women as well. Have we actually looked at our policies so that they're inclusive about women's biology? Have we actually trained our managers to respond safely and supportively, or are we still in the performance management mode? Do you know what I mean? And also for every woman, not just midlife women, but for every single woman, what are the reasonable adjustments that any woman in our organisation can access? Is it really clear? Are they practical things that women actually want? And, have they been decided by the blokes in the boardroom that, this would be a good idea? Have we actually engaged with the women in our organisation to say, all of you working productively in our workforce? And I think the last one is for women, every single woman in the organisation, to know that she can ask for support. Or have we made it really difficult and unsafe? Have we, for lack of a better expression, have we been burning witches? So basically, Megan's going to burn herself out until she can't do it anymore, and then we're either going to make her redundant, we're going to fire her, or she's just going to leave her of her own accord because she's, literally can't do the job anymore. Do we keep burning the witches, or are we going, hey, Megan, we realise you look a bit tired lately. I think you've got a lot on your plate. Your team. What can we do to help you manage your team? Do we need to shift things around a little bit? Would you like to adjust your hours? Would you like to work from home a couple of days a week? What can we do to keep you working? Right?
Yeah.
Are we in a safe space, or are we in the witch burning space? And I think that's the biggest shift now that we need organisations to take to keep midlife women employed, because the impacts, so I've talked about the impacts financially from an economic point of view, but the impacts for women if we don't maintain our paid employment are actually much more devastating, not just from a personal, losing your purpose and all that sort of thing, feeling like you've been dismissed. It's more around, if we don't have employment, we can't maintain our housing, we can't maintain good healthcare.
Yeah,
Those two things, well, those three things, housing, healthcare, and it's the other thing I just said. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. We need employment to be healthy, and we need organisations to stop looking at us as a problem and start looking at us as opportunities, because we've got so much to give as women.
absolutely. And I really like that phrasing about, not feeling like we're a problem.
Correct. Yeah,
Not feeling like we're being viewed, we're being regarded as a problem. Oh, they've got,
correct.
time off again. Or as
Yeah,
a teacher I spoke to recently, or an ex-teacher who simply left. And this is, do our organizations looking at this from the point of view of, well, they might just leave and then we've got rid of that problem, not being
correct.
cognizant of the cost to them to recruit somebody else into that
Yeah,
role, aside from everything else. And
yeah.
also reasonable, we used to use the word reasonable accommodations, didn't we? And I get so frustrated with that. I'm sure you do too. You're not accommodating me. It's about
Yeah,
it's about adjusting. And
yeah.
clearly
It's not
there are
special.
some job roles where that's more difficult. Doesn't mean to say that we
Yes.
shouldn't do it. There is generally something, and thinking about my own experience in managing a whole range of different services, there is always something. So if you've got a housekeeping team, there is always something you can do to give some sort of reasonable break. And I
Yeah,
think there's an element of trust in there too, in that we must make sure that we're trusting, and that applies to all of our workforce, doesn't it? We must make sure that we are starting off from a place of trust, that
correct.
that when we do make those adjustments, that so if it is working from home, then that will be honored in the right way. And I think
Yeah,
fundamentally, this conversation, what it's really reminding me of, Megan, is let's get this right from the start. Let's start from
correct.
school age. Let's start educating in schools as part of life awareness the impact that hormones can have and the importance of hormone health, and that it's not something to be avoided, pushed away, got on with,
Yeah,
because it's fundamentally part of who we are and touches on
yeah,
every element of life. So that
yeah.
cycle that we were talking about earlier becomes even more important in that context, doesn't it? That
It does.
recognition. And I think for
Yeah,
me, that's one of the biggest messages is that yes, and you and I were saying earlier on, weren't we, that, frankly, can this all be a bit shit? Yes, frankly,
yes.
it can. Um, right throughout life, hormone changes can make things really difficult. And we don't want to give an impression that and also something that I'm finding more and more is that I thought somehow it would just change. So I didn't know anything about perimenopause. I knew a bit about menopause. We're going back quite a long time now. I had mine very early. But somehow I think I still thought, even though when I was a little bit more educated, I somehow thought it would stop. And I think that's
Yeah,
got to be part of that realization, hasn't it? That this is
yeah.
about, this comes back to our what we were saying about making choices. What choices can we make for ourselves that will
Yes.
actually help that longer term situation? Because it doesn't just stop. There isn't an off switch. It's hormone change. So it will continue to have
Yeah.
an impact. And what message then are we sending that means that people aren't fearful? There's also
Mm.
not we're not thinking that somehow it's all going to be roses and butterflies and we'll skip through it at the other side. But actually, what you were saying, it's taken a good few years But you do
Yeah.
feel now, and you do feel now like you've come home a bit almost, haven't you? You've
I
found
do, yeah.
you.
I mean, as I said to you earlier, Rona, before we started recording, I think for me it was the fact that I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing when my change started. And my mother is not in my life. I don't have older women in my family that I can go and ask something to. And the older women who are friends of mine in my life, when I sort of mentioned it, they were like, ah, it's not that. So that unknowing, and I'm someone that's incredibly organized. Things for me in life are very black and white. I follow a path. That I'm very task orientated. And so the uncertainty and unknowing, I think, was probably what was the most terrifying thing. But then once I understood what was going on, so first of all, realizing and being diagnosed for a natural thing of perimenopause, having that moment of recognition of, okay, I'm not going crazy. This is a thing. That was probably the first stage of going, yep, I can do this, because then I had a task that I could understand, a thing that I could investigate and learn about. I think the constant learning, because it is a constant learning, and it's been a good 7 years, and it's like you said, there's not just one thing. I can't just say I got onto patches and changed my life, because that's not true. I started patches, they worked, and then I went on to a mini pill, then I went on to another mini pill, and then I've gone on to straight progesterone and estrogen gel, but I'm also on the vaginal estrogen and the testosterone. All of those things have taken a long time. I've also worked out that, and I bring this back to my mantra, because it is something that before I started my business, before in the very early stages of my menopause transition, and feeling really desperately depressed and like just in a hole. But for me, I was like, I've got to move. So my mantra is movement, mindset, modify. And this came from a place of genuine vulnerability of no one's coming to save me. I need to get this sorted out for myself, right? So the movement part, yes, it's about physical exercise, but it was more about get up, keep moving, put one foot in front of the other, keep finding out, discovering, keep that momentum, right? The mindset piece, as I said earlier, I'm someone that has lived with depression, mostly unmedicated my whole life. So the mindset piece, I knew I had to reframe what was going on in my life. I didn't want, the thoughts were uncontrollable. I knew that they weren't real most of the time, but I really had to go to myself, if you don't get positive here, if you don't move out of this negative space, you're just going to keep attracting darkness. So get positive, be the positive object, because positive objects attract each other. So be positive, find the positive things that are going to help you with your mental state. And then the last thing was the modify. And so all of this has evolved over time, but the modify piece was I knew I had to stop drinking. Alcohol for me early on was really bad for my transition into perimenopause. But I resisted that because I wanted to go out drinking with my friends. I wanted to do Friday night work drinks. And it always ended for me in tears and in a deep trough of depression. I wanted to, I was struggling a lot with body pain. So I was pushing myself though. I'd completed a half marathon and I was training for a full marathon. I was caning myself, Rona. And then in the end, I was like, I can hardly walk. Like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this to myself? So just stop doing that, right? Change, you need to move, you need to exercise, but do something different that's not hurting you. And so the modify piece, and then, those things also changed around people who were in my life. I haven't always been the best person, I have no issue saying that. We all grow up and learn different times and how to be in different places. But there were certain people in my life that weren't working for me anymore. the things that I was doing with those people were having really negative impacts on me. And so defining a boundary of, I can't go drinking with you, but I still want to be your friend. So would you like to go for a walk on a Sunday afternoon, right? All those things, that movement mindset modify process over several years is what has really helped me above everything else to go, this is a cycle. It's a cycle of renewal. It is a cycle of change. It's a flow state, right? Because at first I thought this is the end. And I think a lot of women think that because that's the mindset of, your biological clock's ticked and, you're older and la la la. So there's all that negative stuff. But what I've worked out is, and I think, deep down, because I am very in tune with the moon, that's my maiden name is Luna, is this is just another revolution. It's another cycle around the sun. And so just move through this cycle, doing the things that serve you in a positive way, and all the other stuff, just get rid of it. And once I really got into that flow state, things have really changed for me. I've been much clearer in the person that I am. I've got much better and deeper friendships with people, and I've made some beautiful new friends that I never in a million years have thought I'd be friends with, but I am, and I love those relationships. I've become very clear in my purpose in my work, like both in my day job, but also in my side hustles, because it's not just menopause. I have a beach house and I also have an apparel brand that I'm about to launch. I've just stopped, I suppose, apologizing for something that is natural and is happening to me. And instead of apologizing, I've gone, what do I need? And how can I find that thing? Because deep down, I'm still Megan. And I think that's the other thing. A lot of us, I know again for myself early on, I felt like I was an imposter in my own life. Whereas now I'm like, no, this is my life. This is who I am. And I'm not going to keep apologizing for being me. And I think a lot of women need to hear that. Like, you're meant to be here. The thing you're going through is natural. Some of us are going to have a shitter time than others. Some of us will have that terrible time for longer than others. But I think the sooner you start to just be at peace with who you are, that this is the cycle, the much easier it's going to get. And yeah, I think, we're both proof of that. I've got a lot of women in my life that are proof of that things get better. It just takes a revolution to get there. Yeah.
But we can drive that revolution. It does
We
take
can.
courage, doesn't it? It does take
Yeah.
guts to step outside of the
Yeah.
patterns maybe that we've got into. But
Yes.
thinking about this in the context of life as we know it, I do think that's really powerful because it can feel like we're not in control, can't it? It can feel like our hormones are
Yes.
controlling us. And
Yes.
I think that's a really, really strong message to get out there that we can
Yeah.
make those changes. It
There's
does.
so much that we're not in control of, but there is so much that we are in control
Mm,
of. You putting in your mouth. You're the only one that puts the things in your mouth. It's a really powerful thing when you say that to people. You're in control of what goes in your mouth. You're in control of when you go to bed. You're also in control of who you hang around with. You're in control of how you spend your time. And mostly, you can be in control of your behavior. So control those
mm.
things. Stop worrying about everything else. Like that. And that is, for me, it's been really powerful. I I just go, yeah, once you get those, it's just a few things. It's just really a few little adjustments. And I'm like, oh God, this has become so much easier.
Because we do have a tendency potentially, don't we, to overcomplicate things. And I
We
wonder
certainly
too
do.
that there is so much now, life throws so much at us in terms of our news feeds, where many of us are scrolling now. There's a
Yeah.
lot more coming in
Yeah.
that is distracting, harmful potentially, and means that we're not necessarily listening to what feels true to us. So,
Correct.
we talked earlier on about lifting, and there's a lot now that we know that strength training is hugely positive for us in terms of
Yeah.
hormone change.
But you don't need to do
It's
it in a
got
way
to,
that's hurting
it's got
you.
to be right. It's got to be right for us, hasn't it? So it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily need to be painful, and we don't have to do all the things. I think that's what I'm picking up from what you're saying too. You've learned, and it's something I've had to learn too, and still I'm learning, not to
Yeah.
necessarily have to do all the things, and
Yeah.
be all things to all people, because
Yeah. Yes and no, because what I would say about that is be the things that you want to be, do the things that you want to do. So I really did
mm,
have an epiphany at the end of last year where I was like, I'm giving so much of myself to this particular task in my life. And it was debilitating. And then I just made a decision that I'm only going to do the thing that I need to do for that task and not any more than that. Because I have a full-time day job. I have three side hustles. I have aging parents. I have my younger sister. Help her with her babies, and a husband. I always leave him till last for some reason, and a fur child. But my point is, you can do. So I do a lot of things that I choose to do. I'm part of a gardening club. I do their social media. Like I do and am involved in a lot of things. I think the part is don't do the thing that doesn't serve you. If it's not working for you, adjust it because your time is precious. So do the thing that you want to do that is positive in your life because then you might want to do more, like me. If that's me, that's my personality. I want to add more. But by the same token, that could mean for someone else actually being able to read a book for an afternoon on a Sunday, right? That's the thing that you want to do. So
yes.
do that.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love that, Megan. That's a really good place to leave this conversation for now. Is
Yes. We could talk
for
forever.
our, we could, because we couldn't we? There's that phrase, we could talk till the cows come home. But it's about choosing the life
Yeah.
that we want to have, and we have got that ability to do that. So thank you so much, Megan Hayward. That has been a great conversation to add to our podcasts for life as
Thank
we
you.
know it.
Thank you so much, Rona. I really appreciate it.